publicity. Mary's hospital had a reputation for being haunted. Patients and staff alike spoke in hushed tones about the abandoned ward on the top floor, left to decay after a tragic fire decades ago. The whispers that echoed through its darkened halls were said to be the voices of the restless spirits trapped there. Sarah was new to ST. Mary's. At 25, she was full of life and curiosity, having just started her nursing career. Despite the grim tales she had heard, she found it hard to believe in ghosts. To her, the abandoned ward was just another part of the hospital, albeit a more decrepit one. One evening, as Sarah sat in the break room with her colleagues, the conversation turned to the infamous ward. Her fellow nurses shared stories of strange occurrences and eerie encounters, each trying to outdo the other. Sarah listened with a mix of amusement and skepticism. "I dare you to spend a night in the abandoned ward," one of the nurses, Mark, challenged, a mischievous grin on his face. "Come on, it's just an old, empty wing. What's there to be afraid of?" Sarah replied, though a slight shiver ran down her spine. "Prove it then," Mark insisted. "Spend the night there, and we'll all know you're braver than any of us." The room fell silent as everyone turned to Sarah, waiting for her response. She hesitated, the weight of their gazes pressing down on her. Part of her wanted to back out, but another part, the part that didn't want to be seen as a coward, pushed her to accept. "All right," Sarah said finally, forcing a smile. "I'll do it." Her colleagues cheered, though there was a nervous edge to their laughter. They knew the stories all too well, and none of them had ever dared to set foot in the abandoned ward after dark. The next night, armed with a flashlight and a sense of determination, Sarah made her way to the top floor. The elevator ride seemed to take forever, the old machinery groaning and creaking as it ascended. When the doors finally opened, she was greeted by a long, dimly lit corridor. The air was thick with dust, and the smell of mildew was overpowering. Broken furniture and discarded medical equipment littered the hallway. The walls, once white, were now stained with age and neglect. Sarah's footsteps echoed loudly as she walked, the sound amplifying the eerie silence. She paused at the entrance to the ward, her heart pounding in her chest. Taking a deep breath, she stepped inside, determined to prove that the stories were nothing more than the product of overactive imaginations. As Sarah ventured deeper into the abandoned ward, the dim light from her flashlight barely cut through the thick darkness. The atmosphere felt heavy, as if the very air was laden with the sorrow and suffering of the past. She could almost hear the echo of hurried footsteps and frantic voices from long ago, but she brushed it off as her imagination playing tricks on her. She set up her small camp in what appeared to be a former nurse's station. The desk was covered in a thick layer of dust, and old patient charts were scattered about, forgotten. Sarah placed her flashlight on the desk, its beam illuminating the area around her. She took out a blanket and a thermos of coffee, trying to make herself as comfortable as possible. As the hours passed, the silence grew more oppressive. Sarah tried to distract herself by reading one of the old patient charts. The entries were mundane at first, details about medications and daily routines. But then, she stumbled upon a chart that mentioned a young girl named Emily. Emily had been a patient in the ward when the fire broke out. According to the notes, she was only 8 years old and had been suffering from a severe illness. A sudden chill ran down Sarah's spine. She could almost picture the little girl, frail and frightened, trapped in the burning ward. She shook her head, trying to dispel the unsettling thoughts. "It's just an old record," she muttered to herself. "Nothing to be scared of." Just then, a faint whisper echoed through the hallway. Sarah's heart skipped a beat, and she froze, straining to listen. The whispering grew louder, though she couldn't make out any words. It sounded like multiple voices, all speaking at once. She turned her flashlight towards the sound, but saw nothing but darkness and the shadows cast by the decaying remnants of the ward. "Hello?" Sarah called out, her voice trembling slightly. "Is anyone there?" There was no response, only the continued whispering. She tried to convince herself it was just the wind or the old building settling, but deep down, she knew it was something more. The whispers seemed to be calling her name, beckoning her to venture further into the ward. Determined to uncover the source of the noise, Sarah grabbed her flashlight and started to follow the sound. Each step she took felt heavier, as if an unseen force was trying to hold her back. The whispers grew louder, guiding her towards a particular room at the end of the hallway. The door to the room was slightly ajar, and as Sarah approached, she could see a flickering light coming from within. She pushed the door open slowly, the hinges creaking ominously. Inside, the room was filled with old hospital beds and medical equipment, all covered in dust and cobwebs. In the center of the room stood a single, intact bed, and on it lay a small figure covered with a white sheet. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The whispers were now a low, mournful wail. She inched closer to the bed, her flashlight trembling in her hand. As she reached out to lift the sheet, the whispers suddenly stopped, plunging the room into an eerie silence. With a deep breath, Sarah pulled back the sheet, revealing a dusty, old doll. Its glassy eyes stared blankly at the ceiling, and its porcelain face was cracked and faded. Sarah let out a nervous laugh, feeling a mix of relief and confusion. "Just a doll," she whispered. "Nothing to be afraid of." But as she turned to leave the room, she heard a soft, childlike voice behind her. "Don't go. Please help me." Sarah spun around, her flashlight beam darting across the room. The doll's eyes seemed to follow her, and for a moment, she thought she saw its lips move. She backed away slowly, her mind racing with fear and uncertainty. The challenge was proving to be far more terrifying than she had ever imagined. Sarah's heart pounded as she left the room with the doll, her mind swirling with fear and confusion. The whispered pleas for help echoed in her ears, making it impossible to shake the feeling that she wasn't alone. She tried to calm herself, reminding herself that it was just a dare, just a game. Determined to uncover the truth behind the whispers, she continued her exploration of the ward. The air grew colder, and the shadows seemed to stretch and twist in the beam of her flashlight. Every creak and groan of the old building set her nerves on edge. As she wandered through the darkened hallways, she came across a small storage room filled with old medical supplies and equipment. Curious, she rummaged through the dusty shelves, finding nothing of interest until she stumbled upon an old, leather-bound journal. The cover was cracked and faded, but it looked like it had been well used. Sarah opened the journal and began to read. It belonged to a nurse who had worked in the ward at the time of the fire. The entries detailed the daily struggles of caring for the patients, the long hours, and the emotional toll it took on the staff. As she read further, she found entries about Emily, the young girl whose patient chart she had found earlier. "Emily is getting worse," one entry read. "She keeps saying she hears whispers at night, voices that tell her things. I don't know if it's the fever or something else, but it's starting to worry me." Sarah's blood ran cold. The whispers. Emily had heard them too. The connection between the past and the present was becoming clearer, and it filled her with a sense of dread. She continued reading, her eyes scanning the pages hungrily. The entries became more frantic as the fire approached. The nurse had tried to save as many patients as she could, but the flames spread too quickly. The last entry was smeared and barely legible, but Sarah could make out a few words. "I'm so sorry. Couldn't save her. Whispers won't stop." The journal slipped from Sarah's hands, hitting the floor with a soft thud. The room suddenly felt suffocating, and she had to get out. She needed fresh air, a moment to think. She retraced her steps back to the nurse's station, her thoughts racing. The whispers were getting louder now, more insistent. They seemed to come from all around her, filling the ward with a ghostly cacophony. Sarah clamped her hands over her ears, but it did little to drown out the eerie sound. She was about to abandon the dare and leave the ward when she heard a distinct voice among the whispers. It was a child's voice, clear and plaintive. "Help me, please." Sarah turned in the direction of the voice, her flashlight shaking in her hand. The beam illuminated a set of double doors at the end of the hallway, the entrance to what appeared to be a treatment room. The doors were slightly ajar, and a cold draft seeped through the gap. Gathering her courage, Sarah approached the doors and pushed them open. The room beyond was large and filled with more abandoned medical equipment. In the center of the room, a figure stood in the shadows, barely visible in the dim light. "Who's there?" Sarah called out, her voice trembling. The figure stepped forward, revealing a little girl in a hospital gown. Her hair was matted and her eyes wide with fear. "Please help me," she whispered again, her voice quivering. Sarah's heart ached at the sight of the frightened child. She took a step closer, trying to appear calm. "I'm here to help," she said softly. "What's your name?" "Emily," the girl replied, her voice barely audible. "I can't find my mommy. The fire. It was so hot. I'm scared." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. This was the ghost of Emily, the girl who had died in the fire all those years ago. She knelt down to Emily's level, trying to offer some comfort. "It's okay, Emily. I'm here now. We'll find a way to help you." Emily reached out, her small hand cold and trembling. As Sarah took her hand, a sudden wave of sadness and fear washed over her. The room seemed to grow darker, the shadows closing in. The whispers grew louder, filling the air with their mournful cries. Sarah realized that she was in far deeper than she had ever imagined. The spirits of the ward were restless, and Emily was at the heart of it all. She had to find a way to bring peace to the abandoned ward, or risk becoming another lost soul within its haunted halls. Sarah held Emily's cold hand, feeling a surge of determination. She had to help this lost soul find peace. "Emily," she said softly, "can you tell me what happened during the fire?" Emily's eyes filled with tears as she recounted the tragic night. "The fire started so suddenly. The nurses tried to save us, but the flames spread too fast. I remember the heat, the smoke, and the whispers. They told me not to be afraid, but I was so scared." Sarah's heart ached for the young girl. "Do you know why the whispers are still here, Emily? Why they haven't gone away?" Emily shook her head. "No, but they keep telling me to find the truth, to remember what really happened." Sarah decided to delve deeper into the mystery. She spent hours exploring the ward, searching for any clues that could shed light on the fire and the whispers. She found more patient records, old photographs, and even a few personal items left behind in the chaos. One particular photograph caught her eye. It was a group picture of the hospital staff, taken a few weeks before the fire. Among the smiling faces, Sarah recognized the nurse who had written the journal she found earlier. Her name was Nurse Helen. As Sarah studied the photograph, she noticed something odd. In the background, partially obscured by the group, was a man she didn't recognize. He wasn't wearing a staff uniform, and his presence seemed out of place. Sarah's intuition told her that this man was significant. She took the photograph and went back to the nurse's station, where she had left the journal. Flipping through the pages, she searched for any mention of the mysterious man. Her efforts paid off when she found an entry describing a visitor who had come to the ward several times before the fire. "He was always so secretive," Nurse Helen had written. "He claimed to be a friend of one of the patients, but something about him felt wrong. I saw him talking to Emily a few times, and she seemed frightened of him." Sarah's pulse quickened. Could this man have had something to do with the fire? She needed more information. She decided to check the hospital archives, hoping to find records of visitors from that time. The archives were located in the basement, far from the abandoned ward. Sarah made her way down the dark, narrow stairs, her flashlight flickering ominously. The basement was cold and musty, filled with rows of old filing cabinets and boxes. She spent hours sifting through the dusty records, her determination unwavering. Finally, she found what she was looking for, a visitor log from the days leading up to the fire. Her eyes scanned the names until she found one that matched the description of the mysterious man, Richard Hargrove. Richard Hargrove had visited the ward multiple times, always signing in and out at odd hours. Sarah's mind raced as she tried to piece together the puzzle. Why was he there? What did he want with Emily and the other patients? She found another document, a police report from the night of the fire. It mentioned that the cause of the fire was never determined, but there were rumors of foul play. Richard Hargrove's name was listed as a person of interest, but he had disappeared shortly after the fire and was never found. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. The whispers, the ghostly presence, everything pointed to Richard Hargrove as the key to the mystery. She needed to find a way to confront him, to uncover the truth and help Emily find peace. Returning to the abandoned ward, Sarah felt a renewed sense of purpose. She found Emily waiting for her in the same room as before. "Emily, I think I know who started the fire," Sarah said gently. "A man named Richard Hargrove. Do you remember him?" Emily's eyes widened with recognition. "Yes, I remember him. He was always so angry. He said terrible things, and he scared me." Sarah nodded, her suspicions confirmed. "I think he had something to do with the fire. We need to find a way to make him answer for what he did. Do you think you can help me?" Emily nodded, her small face resolute. "I'll try." Together, they searched the ward for any remaining traces of Richard Hargrove. As they delved deeper into the dark corners of the abandoned hospital, the whispers grew louder, more agitated. Sarah felt a growing sense of urgency, knowing that they were close to uncovering the truth. In a hidden compartment behind an old cabinet, they found a box filled with Richard's belongings. Among the items were letters, photographs, and a small, charred diary. Sarah opened the diary, her hands shaking. The entries revealed a man consumed by rage and jealousy, convinced that the hospital staff were conspiring against him and neglecting his loved one. The final entry was chilling. "If they won't listen, I'll make them pay. I'll make them all pay." Sarah's heart pounded as the pieces of the puzzle fell into place. Richard Hargrove had set the fire, driven by his twisted sense of vengeance. The whispers were the voices of the victims, calling out for justice. As Sarah and Emily prepared to leave the ward, they heard a final, anguished whisper, "Help us." Sarah knew what she had to do. She took the diary and the evidence they had found and made her way to the hospital administration. It was time to expose the truth and bring justice to the lost souls of the abandoned ward. Sarah's heart raced as she walked through the hospital halls, the weight of the evidence in her hands. She had to make sure the truth was revealed, not just for Emily, but for all the souls trapped in the abandoned ward. She approached the hospital administration office, her mind set on her mission. Inside, the atmosphere was starkly different from the eerie, deserted ward. The brightly lit room bustled with activity, but Sarah's arrival with the dusty diary and documents caught the attention of the staff. She asked to see the head administrator, Mr. Collins, a stern-looking man in his 50s. "What is this about?" Mr. Collins asked, eyeing the old, charred items Sarah placed on his desk. Sarah took a deep breath and began explaining everything she had discovered, the fire, the whispers, and Richard Hargrove's involvement. She showed him the visitor logs, the police reports, and finally, the damning diary entries. Mr. Collins listened, his expression growing graver with each piece of evidence. When she finished, he sat back, a look of disbelief and sorrow on his face. "I had heard the stories about the ward, but I never imagined. This is beyond tragic. We need to do something," Sarah urged. "These spirits, especially Emily, won't find peace until we acknowledge what happened and bring Richard Hargrove to justice." Mr. Collins nodded slowly. "You're right. I'll contact the authorities and make sure this information is thoroughly investigated. Thank you for bringing this to light, Sarah." As she left the office, a sense of relief washed over her. She had done her part, but she knew her journey wasn't over. She had to return to the ward, to Emily, and let her know that help was on the way. The ward was colder than ever as Sarah stepped back inside. The whispers were a constant murmur now, more anxious than before. She found Emily in the same room, waiting patiently. "Emily," Sarah said softly, "we did it. We've told the right people, and they're going to investigate Richard Hargrove. You'll get justice." Emily's ghostly form seemed to brighten for a moment, a flicker of hope in her eyes. "Thank you, Sarah. But the others, they're still angry." Sarah looked around, feeling the presence of the other spirits more intensely than ever. "What do they want?" Before Emily could answer, the whispers escalated into screams. Shadows moved rapidly around the room, and the temperature dropped even further. The spirits were no longer just restless, they were enraged. Sarah felt a sudden force push her to the ground, and she looked up to see the ghostly figures of the patients who had died in the fire. Their faces were twisted with pain and anger, and they surrounded her, their voices a chaotic roar. "Why did you leave us?" one spirit screamed. "You should have saved us," another cried out. Sarah tried to explain, her voice trembling. "I'm trying to help you. Please understand, I'm on your side." But the spirits were beyond reasoning. Their anger was a powerful force, driven by years of suffering and injustice. Sarah struggled to stand, feeling their icy grips pulling at her. Emily stepped forward, her small voice cutting through the chaos. "Please, stop. She's here to help us." The spirits hesitated, their focus shifting to Emily. "She can't change what happened," one of them hissed. "No," Emily replied, "but she can make sure it doesn't happen again. She can tell our story." The room fell silent, the tension thick in the air. Sarah slowly rose to her feet, her body aching from the spectral assault. She looked at Emily, her heart breaking for the young girl who had suffered so much. "I will tell your story," Sarah promised, her voice steady. "I will make sure everyone knows what happened here, and I will do everything I can to prevent it from happening again." The spirits seemed to relax, their forms becoming less defined. The anger and pain that had held them in the ward for so long began to dissipate. Emily smiled faintly at Sarah, her eyes full of gratitude. "Thank you," Emily whispered. "It's time for us to rest now." One by one, the spirits faded away, their whispers finally silenced. The room grew warmer, the oppressive darkness lifting. Sarah felt a sense of peace wash over her, knowing that she had helped these lost souls find their way. As she turned to leave the ward, she felt a final, gentle touch on her shoulder. She looked back to see Emily's smiling face one last time before the little girl's spirit vanished into the light. Sarah walked out of the abandoned ward, her steps lighter than before. She knew the journey ahead would be challenging, but she was ready. She had made a promise, and she intended to keep it. The hospital was quiet as she made her way to the exit, the echoes of the past finally laid to rest. She stepped outside, the morning sun casting a warm glow over St. Mary's Hospital. It was a new day, and with it came the hope of a brighter future, free from the shadows of the past. Several months later, the investigation into the fire and Richard Hargrove's actions brought long overdue justice. The hospital honored the victims with a memorial, and the abandoned ward was finally renovated and reopened, this time filled with life and hope rather than sorrow and whispers. Sarah walked out of the abandoned ward, feeling a mix of relief and exhaustion. The spirits were at peace, but she knew her task wasn't over. She had promised to tell their story and ensure that justice was served. The hospital administration was taking action, but there was still much to be done. In the days that followed, Sarah worked closely with Mr. Collins and the authorities. The evidence she had gathered was crucial in reopening the investigation into the fire. The story quickly gained attention, both within the hospital and in the wider community. People were shocked to learn about the tragedy that had been hidden for so long. Journalists began to cover the story, and Sarah found herself at the center of a media whirlwind. She gave interviews, shared the diary and other documents, and spoke about the spirit's suffering and the need for justice. The public's reaction was overwhelming, with many expressing their support and urging the authorities to take swift action. One evening, as Sarah was preparing for another interview, she received a call from Mr. Collins. "Sarah, I have some news," he said, his voice solemn. "We've located Richard Hargrove. He's been living under a different name in a nearby town." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "What happens now?" "The police are moving in to arrest him, Mr. Collins explained. "With the evidence you've provided, we have a strong case against him." Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her. "Thank you for letting me know, Mr. Collins." "You're the one who deserves thanks, Sarah. Without your bravery and determination, this might never have come to light." Later that night, the news broke that Richard Hargrove had been arrested. The public outcry was immediate and intense, with many demanding that he be held accountable for his actions. Sarah watched the news coverage, feeling a sense of closure beginning to take hold. Justice was finally within reach. The hospital staff and the families of the victims organized a memorial service to honor those who had died in the fire. Sarah was invited to speak at the service, and she spent days preparing her speech, wanting to ensure that she did justice to the memories of those lost. On the day of the memorial, the hospital's courtyard was filled with people. A large photograph of the abandoned ward was displayed, surrounded by flowers and candles. Sarah stood at the podium, her hands trembling slightly as she looked out at the crowd. "Thank you all for being here today," she began. "We are here to remember the lives that were tragically lost in the fire that occurred in the abandoned ward of St. Mary's Hospital. For too long, their stories were forgotten, their voices silenced. But today, we honor their memories and vow to never let such a tragedy happen again." She spoke about Emily and the other patients, sharing their stories and the whispers that had guided her to uncover the truth. As she spoke, she could see the faces of the families, some with tears in their eyes, others with looks of determination. They were united in their grief and their resolve to seek justice. After the service, many people approached Sarah to thank her and share their own memories of the hospital and its patients. She felt a deep sense of connection with them, knowing that they all shared the same goal, to ensure that the victims were remembered and that such a tragedy would never be repeated. With Richard Hargrove in custody, the legal proceedings began. Sarah testified in court, recounting her experiences in the abandoned ward and presenting the evidence she had found. The trial was long and emotionally draining, but Sarah's determination never wavered. She knew she was fighting for those who could no longer fight for themselves. Months later, Richard Hargrove was found guilty of multiple charges, including arson and manslaughter. He was sentenced to life in prison, with no possibility of parole. The verdict brought a sense of justice and closure to the families and the community. The hospital administration, inspired by Sarah's bravery, decided to renovate and reopen the abandoned ward. They wanted to transform it into a place of healing and hope, a tribute to the victims and a reminder of the importance of vigilance and compassion in healthcare. Sarah was invited to the grand reopening of the ward, now renamed the Emily Ward in honor of the young girl who had played such a pivotal role in uncovering the truth. The once dark and desolate halls were now filled with light and life, decorated with murals and photographs celebrating the resilience of the human spirit. As Sarah walked through the newly renovated ward, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She had kept her promise to Emily and the other spirits, ensuring that their stories were told and their memories honored. The whispers had finally been silenced, replaced by the sounds of laughter and healing. The journey had been long and difficult, but Sarah knew that it had all been worth it. She had helped to bring justice and peace to those who had suffered, and in doing so, she had found her own sense of purpose and strength. The hospital continued to thrive, its staff and patients inspired by the story of the abandoned ward and the bravery of a young nurse who had dared to uncover the truth. And though the whispers had faded, their message of hope and resilience would forever echo through the halls of St. Mary's Hospital. As the years passed, Sarah continued to reflect on her experiences in the abandoned ward, knowing that the journey had profoundly changed her. She had faced fear and uncertainty, but had emerged stronger and more resolute. Her commitment to patient care and advocacy only grew, driven by the memories of the spirits she had helped find peace. One evening, as Sarah was preparing for bed, she received a call from Mr. Collins. His voice was filled with a mixture of relief and sadness. "Sarah, I thought you'd like to know that Richard Hargrove passed away in prison this morning. It seems he never showed any remorse for what he did." Sarah felt a complex wave of emotions wash over her. "Thank you for letting me know, Mr. Collins. I hope that this brings some closure to the families of the victims." "I believe it will," he replied. "You've done so much for them, Sarah. You've given them a voice and ensured that their loved ones will never be forgotten." After hanging up, Sarah sat by the window, looking out at the night sky. The journey that had begun with a dare had taken her through unimaginable horrors and revealed the depths of human suffering. But it had also shown her the incredible resilience and strength that could be found even in the darkest of times. The next day, Sarah visited the Emily ward, now a vibrant part of the hospital dedicated to pediatric care. The walls were adorned with colorful murals, and the rooms were filled with laughter and hope. She walked through the halls, feeling a deep sense of peace and fulfillment. As she stood in front of a mural depicting a bright, sunny meadow, she heard a familiar, gentle voice. "Thank you, Sarah." She turned and saw Emily's spirit standing beside her, smiling warmly. "You're welcome, Emily," Sarah whispered. "I'm glad you're at peace now." Emily nodded. "We all are. Because of you." The spirit faded, leaving Sarah with a profound sense of closure. She knew that Emily and the other spirits were finally free, their suffering acknowledged and their stories told. The whispers that had once filled the abandoned ward were now a distant memory, replaced by the sounds of healing and hope. Sarah spent the rest of her career working tirelessly to improve patient care and safety. She wrote a book about her experiences, sharing the lessons she had learned and the importance of compassion and vigilance in healthcare. The book became a bestseller, inspiring countless others to take up the cause. In the years that followed, the story of the abandoned ward and the whispers that had guided Sarah became a powerful symbol of resilience and hope. The Emily ward thrived, its walls echoing with the laughter of children and the dedication of those who cared for them. Sarah's journey had been long and filled with challenges, but she had found her purpose and fulfilled her promise. The spirits of the abandoned ward had finally found peace, and their stories would continue to inspire and guide future generations. Epilogue. Sarah retired from nursing many years later, leaving behind a legacy of compassion and advocacy. The Emily ward remained a testament to her bravery and determination, a place where the past was honored and the future was filled with hope. On the anniversary of the fire, the hospital held a memorial service to remember the victims and celebrate the progress that had been made. Sarah was invited to speak, and as she stood before the crowd, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment and gratitude. Today, we remember those who were lost and honor their memories by continuing to strive for a better, safer future, she said. Their whispers have guided us, and their stories have given us the strength to make a difference. As she looked out at the faces of the families, staff, and patients, she knew that the journey had been worth it. The abandoned ward was no longer a place of fear and sorrow, but a beacon of hope and resilience. Sarah's heart swelled with pride as she concluded her speech. Let us never forget the past, and let us always move forward with compassion and determination. Together, we can ensure that the whispers of the past become the voices of a brighter future. The crowd erupted in applause, and Sarah felt a sense of peace wash over her. The whispers had finally been laid to rest.